Hello. So you've received the handout, Top Tips for Efficient Assessing and Report Writing. And I just want to talk through and elaborate upon some of the points. Point number one is make up test packs or papers in batches. Easy thing to do. Maybe if you look at the start of a term, how many assessments you have booked in or how many assessments you anticipate. That way they're made up ready for you to just pull out. You've done your photocopying of your dash, for example, as well. So do I always do it? No. Should I do it? Yes, to save me time. Writing the background before the assessment. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I find that really useful. Now, personally, I have do 2 or 3 assessments a week. I will write the background the morning before the assessment. So usually my assessments start between 9:15 or 9:30. So I'll get up, I'll prepare the assessment room, make sure it's ready for the client. And then I will sit down, find their Google form that they filled in for the background information. I will put that either sitting in my desk using 2 screens, or very often I'm doing it while having my morning cup of tea. And I would simply split my screen. So I've got the Google form on one side and the background on the other. I use a similar person. So if it's a female age 10, I'll use one for a female that's around age 10 that I've written previously, change the name. My format's going to be very similar, so sometimes I don't even need to repeat what I'm writing. So for example, if I'm talking about the fact that English is their first language and no other languages are spoken in the home, more often than not that stays the same throughout. And even with my questions regarding reading and spelling, the client will often be ticking the same things. So his reading speed is low, he misses out words, etc. So sometimes I don't need to retype all of it. And that's really important that your questionnaire is laid out in the same order as prescribed by SASC. Otherwise, you're looking back and forward. Split screen, questionnaire laid out with the questions in the order that you'll be writing it up on your Google form or whatever form you're using to collect the background information will make it much easier. In your manuals, use post-it notes to label the tables you're going to need. So you're not searching back and forward. You can label them with ages or which particular subtests they are. It's good to have different templates for he, she, and different levels of difficulty. And that will grow as you become more experienced and you begin to think, well, that student was a boy and he was age 9 and he was quite severe. Then you'll be able to use that template for another boy, age 9, that's got similar strengths and weaknesses. Common phrases, things like it was effortful for them, or the phrases that relate to how you describe a particular, sorry, I need some water, how you describe particular tests. So, for example, for phonological awareness is the ability to manipulate and blend sounds, so forth. Very often you can get those from the manuals. Appendices, I had this problem recently where I hadn't noticed something was a problem. Somehow it had got changed on my appendix. So make sure they're regularly up to date so you're not having to check them for every single student if they're there on your template. When assessing, remember to observe what the student is doing. Ask them how they completed a task. So for example, a verbal task is a key one. How did you do that? Sometimes when you're focused on marking, focused on administering the test, all of these things are overwhelming and you forget to ask how. And if you write how on there, it's a little trigger for you. Highlight it or write it in big red letters, a trigger for you to find out how they did it. It might be you don't need to ask them. It may have been very, very obvious what they were doing. But again, it's still that trigger to remind you to write it down. Some people write it on the test papers. Other people might have a template they've made up where they write all their observations. It's whatever works for you. But even still write it on the test paper, even if you're using that template to remind you to write it on your template. If you can score as you go along, that's helpful. So at the moment I use Woodcock. So what I tend to do is I do all of the Woodcock cognitive before the break, usually if the student can manage it. And then I input the scores into the computer in the break. It takes about 5 minutes and I've got my scoring. That has definitely cut down on the amount of time I would have allocated to marking up RIT and CTOP and TOML, for example. But again, even if you are still using those tests, then you can begin to mark some of them up in the break, maybe, if you feel comfortable with that. I know perhaps you prefer to sit and chat, so that's entirely up to you. And then usually you can do a little bit of marking when they're doing, for example, the dash free writing, or if you're giving a maths test, such as the chin maths test, which is a 15-minute test, you've got some time to do the marking. If you're not going to get it all scored up, just focus on your main test, your underlying ability, your cognitive, single word reading, single word spelling. The things that take longer often are the comprehension if you're using Wyatt. And the oral reading, sometimes I don't get done either. And if you're using online scoring, again, it depends on the system. Woodcock's great, but if I have to go on and do some online scoring on Yark, because I sometimes use Yark for reading for my younger learners, that does take me a little bit longer. But try to do as much as you can. I've recently started, as immediately my assessment's over and the client's gone, I've started to complete the table of results. I find that's really helpful then to have that beside me as I'm writing. I'm not someone who can assess in the morning and write that student's report up in the afternoon. That doesn't work for me. I need a break. I tend to do admin and training work, etc., other work in the afternoon. But my mind is just needing a break from assessing that student. So by having the table of results there, that can be really helpful when I come back. I know some of you may want to sit down and start writing up while it's fresh in your mind. And again, we all work in different ways. In Word, you can set up functions where you type in an abbreviated word or a couple of letters, such as I type in MA and it comes up mid-average or mid-average range. I have PA for phonological awareness. PM's a tricky one because often we use PM for time. So try to avoid. I've sometimes sent an email to somebody saying 5 p.m. and it said 5 phonological memory. So just be careful with that. But that can really save time, especially for the scoring. Grammarly's great. There's a free version. I don't know how effective the free version is because I use the paid version. It's much improved since it's become more, it uses AI more. You used to be able to take your report and upload it and it showed you all the corrections that were needed. I found that very time consuming and wasn't helpful for me at all. But now it's on my screen as I write. And I just focus on Grammarly on the errors with spelling, punctuation, grammar, etc. I don't go further into it and get it to make lots of different changes to the way I write because that's my voice. And very often those recommended changes just don't work for me. So I use the paid version, but I have the version that's on my screen as I'm writing, as I'm proofreading. If you have included standard scores in the main body of the report, and some people do, some people don't, in brackets. So single word reading, brackets, standard score, SS 82. You want to make sure you've not made a mistake with your range descriptors, especially if you're using a template. Sometimes I find that I've said low average when I mean below average. And I think as well, for me, I dictate. So sometimes it's not the fact that I've said it's picked up the wrong wording, below average, low average. So what I do is I go to the find button and I ask it to identify with highlight everything that says average, and it picks up low average, above average, all the different range descriptors it will pick up, and I can just go through the report looking for the yellow highlights. Yes, 79 below average, that's correct. 82 below average, that's correct. 114 above average, no, that's not correct. That's that's high average. So it just helps me to pick up any mistakes that have gone into the main body. And finally, if you do offer a post-assessment feedback session, consider how you can manage this. If they come to your home and you prefer that, fine, but obviously it's quite hard to give a set period of time. It could be useful to use something like Zoom or Google Meet for the feedback meeting. Google Meet's free. And I know some of you would use Teams as well. And if you have a calendar system, it will save you time going back and forward, because parents will say, I can do a Saturday morning, or I can do a Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and you don't have a Tuesday or a Saturday morning. So you go back with other times, and then they come back, and it's back and forward, back and forward. This is a business that we're running. So by using a calendar booking system and saying to parents, they are my only available times, they then have to fit in with you. You don't go to your doctors and dentists and say, I've only got Saturday morning, and they give you a Saturday morning appointment. They allocate the appointment and you fit in with it. So by using calendar system, you can set times of when you're free, send that link to the parent. It gets, if you're using Zoom or Google Meet, they will get sent the link for that as well. So it saves you a lot of time. So I hope that is helpful and has given you some tips for making your proofreading, your report writing, and your assessing, all of that process which is involved, a little more efficient, but certainly a little quicker for you. Thank you very much for listening.